Well, I'm delighted today to be here in Geneva with Fred Kermisch, who is an expert coach to private bankers, helping them grow their business. We're going to have a discussion about business development and marketing and financial services. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you, David. Happy to be here.
For those who've not come across you before, Fred, it'd be interesting just to kick off with you explaining a little bit more about your business and how you help private bankers grow their asset base.
Yes, with pleasure. So I do work with private bankers. I help them grow their assets under management, both through acquiring new clients and also through increasing the share of wallet they have with existing clients. And the way we do this is largely focusing on the quality of the relationships. Instead of product pushing, having better conversations, having a better funnel for clients, for identifying the right leads, moving them forward using a robust and rigorous process that then leads to people becoming clients or being disqualified for the right reasons. And generally we find by having better conversations, it leads to better outcomes and helps bankers grow their books of clients.
The thing I love about what you do is employing the psychology and really getting underneath to understand what clients need and what drives and motivates people. Perhaps you'd tell us a little bit more about your approach and how you use psychological techniques when helping people grow their business.
Yes, with pleasure. So, what we see is people can be focusing either on the technical knowledge or the psychological knowledge, which is how they transmit the relevant information. And as a banker, it can be easy to focus sometimes only on the technical side. But the issue is if you're selling to humans, and bankers usually are, they need to find what information is relevant, how to transmit it in a way that is understandable for the client, to help the clients make the right decisions. And usually we find that if we improve the psychological knowledge, understanding how to identify what information is relevant, how to calibrate the communication, it leads to better conversations and outcomes. And of course for bankers, they don't necessarily have too much time to research psychology and communication techniques and persuasion and understand cognitive biases and ways where conversations are sabotaged simply because of the way that we're hardwired as humans. So I help them, find a shortcut to get to the results they need by showing them what information is really relevant and help them hone the skills that lead to quick wins for them and for the clients.
And these techniques are vital right now because, we're in Geneva, it's the home of private banking in Switzerland. The industry has undergone huge change in the last 10, 20 years. How do you see that impacting on business development techniques and the success that bankers are having who are based here, selling internationally?
It's been a huge change because until relatively recently, banking in Switzerland was what we could call a symptom-driven industry. People would look for discretion, they'd come to Switzerland which offered it. Now that has been removed, bankers in Switzerland are in competition with bankers elsewhere, and they need to find what edge they have that is actually relevant, so beyond discretion, and they need to know how to communicate this in a way that clients actually understand it, and they need to be able to stand out. And this is where all of the communication, the framing, the persuasion, the reframing often comes into play. And doing more of the same, if it no longer works, probably won't yield better results. But understanding specifically what to change makes it much easier for bankers to focus on that and get the better outcomes, again, for them and for their clients.
In Switzerland, there are many firms with real specialist knowledge and expertise in certain niche areas like ESG or philanthropy. These services can be market leading with real expertise. But do you find that bankers need to engage with clients on a different level in order to actually have success, or is simply being the best at any one of these competencies sufficient to drive business forward?
That's an interesting question. I don't think it's sufficient to meaningfully drive business forward. I think it's an interesting way to open a door and talk about something, but the real question is, once the door is open, what do you really do? So you can open the door using ESG or philanthropy, but then how do you lead the meeting, and to what extent can the way that you lead the meeting be improved? And when I talk with bankers, and maybe sometimes the most successful ones will be saying, we know we can improve something. We know that if we improve it, we get a better outcome. So let's focus on improving it. I think it's helpful to have this. If you don't have it, it is still not impossible to develop a business. It's even possible to do it. It's a nice to have, and this usually is not the main driver. And relying on it can provide some improvement. But that, I think, typically will be missing where the biggest area of improvement is, which tends to be the strategy, the communication skills, the persuasion skills, the understanding, the reframing, basically entering the client's mind, understanding how it functions, and helping the client reframe and improve their thinking to get to the better decisions.
In many of your social media posts, you use role plays to kind of show how the conversation might go along these lines. I mean,
Yeah.
do you find that technique is useful for bankers employing it to kind of just break down misconceptions, to predict the way things are going to go and anticipate a little bit better?
Yes, it makes a big difference to be able to lead a conversation by asking questions, by, well, what I show in the media post is reframing. Somebody asks a question, how do we question the assumption? Sometimes it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but quite often it's actually practical. How do you take assumptions, question them to help the person arrive to a different conclusion? As we know, there's a big difference in persuasion between trying to tell someone that they're wrong and explain why we are right. And this is very common, even with very successful people, but it's much less effective than if you ask someone how they came to their conclusion, you suggest potentially changing one or two elements to their, I like calling it an algorithm, and seeing what happens. And if they come to a slightly different conclusion, they will own that much better. They won't be resisting, they won't fight back, and and then you're having a conversation with them. And largely it's trying to understand them, understand how they came to the conclusion, making sure they're not missing anything. And sometimes it's just checking. And most of the time people do miss something. It might not be relevant, but even just by having the conversation, that also is a key differentiator. It gets bankers who will push, who will say, I know what's better for you, as opposed to having a conversation of how will we know what is best for you? And just that change in approach usually allows bankers to stand out from the competition and improve their relationships.
And do you think that financial services could learn lessons from other sectors that also deal with high net worth clients, perhaps the luxury sector or any other sector that really looks and listens at what clients want and how it can deliver?
Yes, absolutely. Not only the luxury sector, which is interesting because it caters to roughly the same clientele. And I actually remember arguing that the experience of a client when they go from a luxury boutique to a high-end private bank, which is sort of a luxury boutique, should be somewhat homogenous in terms of experience and how they're taken care of. And there's a lot to learn from the thinking, the design that's put into place in the luxury sector industry, whether it's even the layout of the stores or how things are thought. There's a lot more thinking that happens that a lot of us don't realize. But even an example of a completely different industry, I was talking with a salesperson in a music store, and the music store had been bought over by a chain, and the new manager was saying you should sell more red guitars. And the person was saying, well, you don't understand. Clients don't buy a guitar because it's red. They look at the model, the brand, the feeling, the wood. The color is not important. But the manager didn't understand that. And what happened was that chain then went bankrupt because clients stopped going there. But then the store was purchased by the salespeople who understood the clients, who were able to order what the clients wanted. They were one step ahead in terms of clients' needs. When people walk into the store, they'd get an understanding of who they were, what they needed, what guitars they had, what might be of interest to them, and the extremely high-end, precise, bespoke advice meant that people would go back there even if they didn't need something, but the day they did, they'd buy from them. And that focus, the emphasis on the relationship is what was important. So they were telling the managers, we won't try to sell the wrong guitar to somebody to make money because it's not ethical, it's not how we work. And that's why we have our client base. So even with industries like that, there's a lot to learn.
On the content front, I think during the last 2 years where professional services firms have looked more closely at their marketing online, are you seeing banks here in Switzerland really looking at innovative content, reaching clients in different ways, acknowledging that clients are on their phones, they are exposed to different types of media? Are you seeing firms kind of catching up in that respect, in a method of marketing which was not traditionally used?
So I see two different things. On the one hand, there is the format which has been changed in terms of allowing people to access content on the phones, on the go, on the iPad. Then there's the creation of the content, and I haven't seen a significant change there of trying to interact differently with clients, of highlight and showcase the information. It still seems quite top-down. It seems quite heavy on data, which might not be relevant. The way it's consumed and understood doesn't appear to have changed significantly. It's not easy to do, but we have to be aware of a problem before changing something. For all I know, it's working out fine for them. However, I believe it's possible with the wealth of knowledge in individuals and the companies to do something that's probably easier to consume, that's more engaging, that's easier for people to follow without getting bored. I think it's about really calibrating the content to the audience, which isn't easy when the audience is really diverse in terms of expertise, but being able to calibrate it, I think that makes a big difference. And let's remember, any kind of content like this is in competition with YouTube, with other media, and when we see the work that the leading YouTubers are doing, who have significant businesses because they understand the psychology so well, YouTubers will be focusing on what kind of audience retention do they have after 30 seconds of video. And then they look at the average audience retention rates and they try to understand why do they have peaks, or why do they have troughs in terms of audience gain or loss? What is happening? How can they improve? When I see the work they do, I think the financial service industry has a lot to learn to reach the level of YouTubers sometimes who are still in their 20s, but sometimes have teams of 10, 20, 30 people working exclusively on creating content. And that's just relatively small YouTubers. Some of them are now multimillionaires. But there's a lot to learn from the leading actors in the industry. And I think probably YouTube is one place to look at that.
You would also think that the analytical skills on offer in a bank are very able to analyse the marketing data on email campaigns, on socials, but that, I can imagine, is barely being done, I would guess. I don't know.
So I don't know. I think there's always a risk to analyse the data that's easy to measure, so like the open rate. But one thing is to enter the psychology behind it. Why did this work better than the other? Create hypotheses, check the hypotheses, do A/B testing between campaigns, but really take a step back and understand we're talking to humans. And humans are largely different and diverse, but we're also extremely similar in the way the mind functions and the brain functions. And if the approach was more thoughtful when it came to how this is tailored to humans, I believe we'd see better results. But the good news, of course, is that because the standard is, comparatively to the leaders such as the YouTubers, the standard is quite low, it's easy to stand out by being extremely focused, extremely relevant, and also not just do what we used to do before, but in a different packaging, but actually redesign the entire approach.
So in a sense, like the market complexity that exists here and global financial services, we were saying on the top, for Switzerland to be selling internationally, alongside this technological revolution in marketing, the timing is right for people to seize the opportunity and try and make something of it before everyone has moved to this space, would you say?
Absolutely. I think it's a first mover advantage. I think being able to establish yourself as being the go-to voice who is knowledgeable, reliable, transparent, and also knows how to communicate in a way that helps people learn more, I think that's a game changer.
So for professionals who aren't familiar with coaching, perhaps you could give us a flavour of how you might work with a professional to help them improve their results, grow their book. What would you kind of take them, what kind of journey would you take them on?
So we typically start by establishing a diagnostic of where they are. We see where they want to go. We create what I call the architecture of their book of clients, to have a very clear, precise understanding of what they want to achieve, the type of clients, the size of clients, the profile of the clients, in a way that's relevant. Then we establish the process that they're going to lead people through from being a prospect to being a client or being removed from the prospecting process. We see how we can fill the front end of the funnel and then move people along until the end. And from then on, it's about preparing the meetings with individuals. How are we persuasive? How do we frame? Do we reframe? How do we explain what's relevant? Which tools would actually help a banker sit in front of a client, understand what the needs are, help the banker make the right decision, and then present what is relevant or not relevant, whilst understanding what the competition does, but also eliciting information that helps the client tell the banker specifically what they would need to hear in order to become a client. And this usually before the banker even talks about their own services. This makes it easier for the banker to explain if there's a deal breaker and it makes no sense to move forward, or to talk about how it would make sense for them to move forward and then make a decision together. And then largely it's about preparing for individual meetings with clients. So meeting with Mr. and Mrs. XY. What's the profile? What's the background? What's relevant? What do we know? How do we elicit information? What are they saying during the meeting? What is the follow-up? What are the next steps that are agreed upon? And how do we make sure that the banker remains in control of the process? It makes it easier for the banker to control the process, but also removes the burden of controlling the process from the client, who often has no idea what it's supposed to look like. So by putting the banker more in control, it makes it easier for them to disqualify the wrong people, qualify the right ones, and make sure the process isn't taking too much time and isn't just a bit messy and a bit fuzzy, and that leads to improved results, to better books of clients in a relatively short time period.
Well, great to talk to you today, Fred. We really look forward to sharing this with our members, and I encourage everyone to follow you on LinkedIn and other social platforms.
Thank you, David.